I received the following torch from Miles. The first thing I did, of course, was count the sentences, on account of the wall of gliss making me panic a little bit. Luckily, it's only 4 sentences. The language Miles used, Yaatlaw, was made in part live on stream by Miles and Jake on their shared podcast, Let's Have a Booba. Not that kind of booba, perv. The first step is transliteration, which is a fancy term for matching the sounds that these letters represent to the letters of the Latin alphabet, in this case. That's these letters for the uninitiated. So I actually
swear word
this up at first, because I thought this diacritic here was this entire other letter, and I didn't catch myself until I started to cross-reference my transliteration with my provided glossary, but by that point it didn't take me long to realize what I had done. Once I had the sentences drawn out, though, I had to translate using the grammar information Miles left for me. It's a little more substantive than's typical for a relay, but it is still less than 1,000 words to summarize the functionality of an entire language, or at least enough of the functionality for me to understand what this says. The first 2 sentences didn't give me too much trouble. This is the future marker, this unit means break or smash, this is an instrumental auxiliary, so altogether it means, like, going to break with, or by means of. This phrase is the word for a spell, like a magical spell, paired with the comitative, which is a fancy word for a preposition meaning with or alongside of. And here you see Yaatlaw has a feature called clusivity, which is a way of specifying whether the we that you're talking about in a phrase like we go there often includes the person you're speaking to or not. In this instance, the speaker is included, so altogether we've got we, including you, will destroy our enemies with a dark spell. Menacing. Second verse, different from the first, otherwise it would be a little repetitive, gave me a little trouble, but more on the interpretation end. My initial rough translation went something like, when the storm splits, they will shine, so that we may see the numerous enemies about us. Something to that effect. The third sentence gave me some more trouble. This is my initial gloss. Glossing is a way of demarcating the grammatical and semantic purpose of each element of a sentence, and can be a step in translation. And I came up with 3 possible interpretations before settling on the first one I came up with, which was, although likely not able to make a peaceful world, we will not stop hunting our enemies. The fourth and final sentence similarly had a round of potential translations, and I ended up resolving on, the enemies will not enter our village before their plans are complete. And so, the next step in the relay for me is to translate this into one of my own conlangs, and here's where I admit something mildly embarrassing. So when George asked me if I wanted to participate this year, I jumped at the opportunity, and I filled out the interest form in sort of a hurry, and I agreed to participate in the script ring because I misunderstood the question I had read. I, of course, realized my mistake when George announced the rings we were all going to be participating in, and I realized, oh no, I do not have any functional writing systems paired with any functioning languages ready right now, and the relay is in 6 weeks. And so, being the entrepreneurial spirit that I am, I conceptualized a few possibilities for what I could make for the relay in the time that I had left, came up with a few ideas, some of them more interesting than others, and I immediately picked the easiest one, because duh. In short, I decided to create a special dialect of one of my existing languages that could be paired with an unrelated idea I had for a neat writing system. This conlang I already had is basically a future version of, or descendant of, English, one that has undergone the process of creolization, and which borrows significantly from a frankly absurd number of languages. This language, known in English as Creole, and natively as Querio, is spoken by a slight majority of people living inside of a series of semi-self-sustaining arcology structures, which are sealed away from the outside world to the point of total ignorance of life outside their own walls for the vast majority of the throng of people contained within. Centuries prior, unknown disaster forced humanity into these mountain-sized shelters, but it was so long ago that there is little indication of what that disaster was, and in the cramped corridors of what are essentially sci-fi generation ships that don't fly, cultures intersected in ways they have never before upon the earth. The new dialect I've made for the relay is called English Creole, or natively Angdo'ř, a word which basically just means Indian. It is the local Creole dialect. The dialects of Carrillo are doing a bit of an Arabic. Haha, language nerd humor. Spoken in the arcologies in what we would call northern India, Persia, and Central Asia. It borrows most heavily from Hindi and its relatives, but its sounds are influenced as well by Southeast Asian languages, such as Vietnamese and Khmer, and Somali of the Horn of Africa, and it borrows significant amounts of vocabulary from Brasileiro, a descendant of Portuguese, and Afro-French, or Afranglais, as it is often known. It's a hot mess is what it is. The writing system I developed is called Nawalipi, which is just Hindi for new script. It's a descendant of, or modified form of, Devanagari, the Indian writing system you are most likely to be familiar with, if only visually. I had the idea for this script ages ago, and had just never gotten around to actually doing it. But the basic concept was inspired by a Lingo Lizard video, shout out to Lingo Lizard, where they took a bunch of scripts and designed methods of using them to write English. In the arcologies, English is a prestigious language, much like in reality, but even more so, with it taking on an almost Latin-like role in certain contexts. Multinational religious groups use English to liturgize often, but more importantly, almost all technical documentation is written in a preserved form of English akin to classical Latin, called technical English. Tangentially, in real-life India, there is a phenomenon of prestigious writing systems that are used in reserved context, but seldom for casual writing, such as the Lanta script, and I wanted to emulate that by having a derived form of Devanagari that was specifically designed for writing in technical English, and also Sanskrit because the ability to write in Sanskrit is basically obligatory for South Asian writings. And so I constructed this new Carrillo dialect and Nawalipi basically completely separately from one another, and then I designed a method to use Nawalipi to write Indus Creole. Within the fiction, Carrillo in all its forms is looked down upon. Despite being the native tongue of a good chunk of humanity, it is seen as both lowly and bordering on criminal, and a sign of both societal degradation and impending collapse. Ignore that people have been whining about that impending doom for like 5 centuries now. Because of this, using the fanciful and prestigious Nawalipi script to write in Carrillo in this world is very frowned upon, sometimes to a religious degree, and the use of Nawalipi to write Angdo'ř is associated with certain kinds of violent nationalism and organized crime, to greater or lesser degrees of accuracy. The grammar of Angdo'ř is largely typical for a Carrillo dialect, being based off of English, but with a number of unique structures, some specific to this form of Creole. The language has the same basic word order as English, subject, verb, object, as compared to Yaatlaw's verb, object, subject word order, inspired by the real-world language of Malay, though almost always drops the word for to be, meaning a lot of sentences in the language are essentially pairs of noun phrases linked through standard word order. The language constructs these long noun phrases through the use of the word di, the definite article of the Angdo'ř dialect, that is to say, the word for the. The vocabulary basis of Carrillo in general is very wide, with the family collectively drawing from literally dozens of languages, and around half a dozen major world language families. Another note is that while the intelligentsia of the arcologies as a collective have a degree of awareness about the outside world, It's very abstract knowledge relegated to book learning for the most part, especially with regards to things like weather phenomenon. Because of this, I chose to slightly tweak the translation of the text on purpose. Instead of when the storm splits, since Angdo'ř speakers by and large aren't familiar with the concept of a rainstorm, I chose to interpret this phrase more metaphorically as meaning when the action begins. And so, in line with the militaristic tone of the strangely coherent text I received, I chose to translate this as when the terrible and clamorous battle which breaches begins, with the phrase decipher being essentially the term for a siege or ambush or similar kind of attack. Other than this, I chose to change villages to homes almost entirely because homes is one word in Kerio, and village is a slightly annoyingly long phrase. With that said, here's the whole translation of the torch into Angdo'ř. Xiao awi da sui xiao majina vi kolosili sutra. O tai di nuiseli di horsha di pai du bris, der upang, der majinal kom brilang, per xiao kang lokang equer majinal o kalmaje di xiao. Ke mai ne nireer potungi dar kang dunyabat dai o koprai, sep xiao ner jespo kiu kopo xiao majin. Di majinja ner maikum o xiao ming xiao, bak o en der o we make kau dong kau deer. And that wraps things up on my end. As of writing and recording these words, I do not know what the other translations are, only George does, so I have no idea precisely how badly I bungled things. It's probably fine, though.
Like and subscribe if you are into that sort of thing. I won't force you though, I am not your boss.